Okay, I'm testing sound. Welcome everyone who's here. We're about to get started, so bear with us for a second. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm gonna try to. Hello, I'm just trying to make sure that you guys can hear. So if anybody wants to give me a yes, no.
Are you walking through I live in Oh, I'm Gabriela from the first group blog. She's part of the project. And then I'll
Okay, so we are about to start. Sorry about that. We've changed rooms like 3 times as of right now, so.
pretty small.
Okay.
I thought we should mention the school since that's all that looks. Exciting. So microwave is currently angry at us because we're really truly microwave. So David heard about Micah, I heard about David. I tried to get Micah to help me to make it real. Micah said I'm not going to do
And I can just come around for introduce ourselves and what we're doing.
Yes. Why do you need our zip codes?
You don't have to put it down if you don't want to.
So, should we just
Start.
motion and second? So, okay, I can introduce myself. I'm Gabriela, and I'm well, I'm not going to work from TGPB, but I am representing my collective of artists that work around the subject of student debt. And the way we work is that we have a blog platform and we use all the materials that all the collaborators put there to create performance or create action. And thus far we've done a protest performance in the Washington Square in New York City, which was date specific on the last day of our grace period for student loans. And we've also done a couple of workshops, which is what we originally wanted to do today, but we kind of reworked it so that we can be here with these guys. And we also have this cabaret performance about student debt, which is really fun. So the ASSÉ cabaret slaves of Sally Mae is our main student loan provider in America. So there's a lot of stuff on our website. I'll show you guys more details so you can like have sneak peeks and whatnot. But yeah, we can introduce.
Yeah.
Hi, do you want to name before we
Well, we're all from, the rest of us up here are from straight debt. Most of us live here on the street. And we're going to talk about who we are, what we've done, and share some of our analysis of student debt.
Great. So just for a little bit of context about what street debt is. Street debt largely has its roots in Occupy and other like businesses that was going on in 2011 and 2012. And largely grew out of a number of groups that were organizing around in New York City in the spring of 2012 with our Street Debt campaign on the red. And certainly drew inspiration to the Red Square from what was put up here in 2012 as well.
Yeah, we had some casserole marches in New York City, which were really fun.
I just Gabriela was not quite ready.
No. You're just introducing yourself. Like then, when you're done introducing yourself, then I can just talk about what we're going to do today. Just like, are you sure? Okay. So what's going to happen today is that they're going to facilitate this discussion with you about student debt and tuition and what's happening with that. And simultaneously, I am live streaming with the rest of my collective in New York City and I guess also Michigan. And we're going to be writing a performance for a creative action proposal based on what's happening here. And then in the end, we can just maybe all come together the way or further develop it. This kind of that's how we work. That's what we're doing. Ready? And I hand it down to you again.
Whether it's US or Montreal or Canada, and just very briefly, what organization or what your project is and why you're here. Just really quickly, if you're a group of people.
And if you have any student debt, if
you want to talk
you
about
feel comfortable sharing.
Why don't we start with the
My name is John. I go to the University of Michigan. My parents paid for tuition. I'm from Vermont originally. The reason I'm here is because I'm aiming to switch up my studies, more central that's for philosophy and politics. So I'm using this convention as kind of a large exposure for me to gain more knowledge about certain issues surrounding those politics and philosophy that apply to students at home.
My name is Bree. I'm from Chicago. I'm an adjunct instructor at Columbia College Chicago, and I am part of CASH, the Coalition Against Corporate Higher Education. We're getting ready actually to launch a student debt resistance movement coalition with student debt, and we have an NLG lawyer who's on board. I guess there's people in the Bay Area and Atlanta, and what's the other spot? And NYC, of course. We're working with
I'm Chilean. I study here in UQAM. Maintenant, I just have off session. I will start maybe in September or January. I don't know.
I'm Ange. I came here with these guys. I've worked mostly with Occupy, but I also do all political social movement work. And I'm here because I went to school as an independent private federal loans. And many federal loans are not available to people who do not have parents. So I got in a lot of debt for a drawing degree.
Woo!
Hi, I'm Amira. I'm originally Canadian. I'm from Winnipeg. I went to school in New York City and run a HIV and AIDS activist organization. So people are always interested as to why we're interested in student debt, but I'm one of the lead organizers for the Robin Hood Tax Campaign in the United States. And the Robin Hood Tax Campaign would be beneficial to student debt, and so the Student Global AIDS Campaign, even though we focus on AIDS, is now starting to focus on student debt issues as associated with an FTP and
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm from Michigan. I go to Michigan State University. I'm in an organization called Michigan State Students United, and we actually focus a lot on trying to reduce tuition, so very relevant. And as far as that, I'm in debt right now, and I get
Robin Tax Campaign would be beneficial to student debt. So,
Yeah, we're also from Michigan and also from
now
State. I'm also in Michigan State. So our organization started this year, or a little bit last year. Tuition for mainly about tuition payments, so trying to reduce tuition. I'm doing what's called a little bit, and we're going to get some
Hi, I'm I'm pretty active with the student association there at IX. I'm also in the ASSÉ motivation committee. And I'm here at this workshop because here tuition fees and student debt aren't that much in Quebec. But I wanted to have a view of what it looks like elsewhere.
Alex, I go to the University of Michigan, New York. I have 40K loans when I graduate. They stopped me from changing from Kennedy to philosophy.
Yeah, I think Los Angeles,
Hi, I'm Teo. I was in Montreal. I'm already
I go to the University of Michigan.
with 4 years of school.
I have 40K loans.
I'm here at the Revolutionary Students Movement.
My name is Martin. I'm also I go local in Peterborough at Trent next year. I'm an organizer with the Revolutionary Student Movement, which is a new attempt to build an anti-capitalist Canada-wide student organization. That's why I'm here.
I'm Patrick. I'm also with the Revolutionary Student Movement, but I study, well, I just graduated from University of Guelph.
That is could it be the computer? Suddenly there's a baby in the room.
Seems like it's sorry, why don't we continue?
Yeah, University of Guelph.
Alexander, I'm from TGPB, also University. It's a private school. I think I have 2 other people here from VU, not in this room, but I think we're the only people from a private university who came to this. Oh, you do? All right, good. Nice to see other people who go to private universities. So, I don't know, I believe that, at least in America, top-tier higher education is monopolized by private universities, and they dictate market standards. And I think it's really important that we start looking at debt, like the cause of debt, and like why universities are allowed to charge so much, and how they develop budgets that are so loaded. So that's kind of why I'm graduating.
Hi, I'm Micah. I'm from Edmonton. Oh, sorry. So University of Alberta, out west, and I'm involved with sort of a loose coalition, sort of province-wide, that initially formed out in solidarity with Quebec with the students a couple years ago, and then we sort of were like taking on stuff from our province, and it's sort of dormant right now. We don't cover it. That's happened. But anyway, so yeah, student debt check, and looking forward to having this conversation about like.
We haven't really started yet talking about where you came from and what brought you here.
So I'm from the Arts and Science Students Union at Gokey. And obviously it's not a central students union, it is a faculty union. And yeah, I'm an executive there. And why I came here, obviously being the student union, your main thing is tuition fees and tuition hikes. But also just looking at the middle thing, consistently at UT, we have student reps who vote for fee increases by saying that, oh, it's for the good of the institution, oh, it's for like it'll lead to a better quality of education, which it doesn't. So I just want to see how to counter that.
I'm from here in Montreal. I went to Dawson College and I've just been on sort of like a year of break, but as of September, I will be attending Concordia University here in Montreal. And why am I here? I'm just generally interested. I've been involved in like the student fair and stuff like that, and I kind of miss organizing, so I'm ready to get back into it also. Here I am.
We'll introduce ourselves.
I'm Christine.
I'm Mike. I think 27 undergrad and grad school.
I'm Laura. I don't have any student debt, but I'm interested in thinking about how we talk about austerity in the U.S. and challenging. I purposely didn't want to go with that, but really that meant social distancing. So.
I'm Zach. I have maybe 15 to 20 grand left in student debt. I also went to a private university, also in Michigan, so shout out to all you guys.
My name is Thomas. I currently live in Tennessee. I have $65,000 in debt. My wife had about as much. She's almost out. But,
so we'll talk about two of the main projects that Strike Debt has done since our inception in summer 2012. And one of them is the Rolling Jubilee.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have heard of the Rolling Jubilee, but that was cool. That was kind of first big initiative funding campaign to buy debt for pennies on the dollar, and we're able to do that. The Rolling Jubilee itself is a 501c3. We have the status where we're able to broker deals among financial institutions that sell, these large packages of debt that they deem, they think that they have a chance of being able to recover. So they sell them to these debt collectors who are all these shady small groups who are hard to regulate and will, often use illegal tactics, and they'll harass people. They'll, call people up and threaten them, trying to get them to pay. And if even one person pays, then it'll be worth their investment because they paid about 2 cents for every dollar. And it's these large collateralized packages. And so we, working through lawyers, were able to attain that status that allows us to buy them. So we raised money. We raised $700,000, and which allowed us to buy about $14 million worth of debt. And we haven't spent all of it yet. I think we're more than halfway through. We, purchased maybe 12 million debt, something like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but they're on the website, rollingjubile.org. And we started off buying primarily medical debt. We have some maps on the website which are really interesting that show, we don't know which individuals we bought debt from. We're allowed to send them one letter, and we basically just drafted a letter saying, your debt is absolved, you're free. We're not going to try and collect it from you. And And so this was kind of just to raise awareness about this practice of buying, that debt is, the financial institutions that, guarantee these loans value the debt at so much less, and yet the debtors are still on the hook for the full amount. That seems very wrong, and to raise awareness about that. And especially in the first purchases we bought were medical debt, and it seems like there's a really strong argument there that nobody should have to go into debt because they get sick.
You Canadians go there.
Is there more that I left out, Laura? Probably.
Oh, well, I mean, it's a 2-year project at this point, so there's a lot to talk about. But I think to back up a little bit and talk about the framing of the reason why we bothered in the first place. Several years back, basically what we wanted to do was talk about the value of what it was that you thought you owed. So that the very simple question of who owes what to whom, right? And what sort of responsibilities we have to one another. And so we started to focus on different types of debt, and we wanted to make connections where there seemed none. And that was healthcare, education, housing after the crash. And so we thought that in the context of the U.S. at the time, student debt wasn't as much a focus. It was certainly in organizing, but for more of to change the conversation in the mainstream, we thought that we would focus on medical debt because the morality around the issue of whether you pay or whether you can or can't pay, if you're sick and you have no control over that, we thought that was a great place to start and try to shift, the debate a bit, because the U.S., the U.S. is a completely different landscape from Canada. So again, when Strike Debt started, I was incredibly inspired by what had happened in Montreal, in Quebec largely, and it was so clear that there are institutions and organizations that have memory, institutional memory, and that the conversations around student hikes were really conversations about austerity and what social good is. So we wanted to take that and try to do something in the U.S. It was an initiative to do that.
And we have coming up in the fall, we're going to announce our first student debt purchase. So we have purchased some private student loans that we're abolishing, and in the fall, we're going to be making a big push about that. And potentially, part of why we're doing this is to, we hope other people will organize around that announcement as well. And so if you're in the process of forming a student union and this would be useful to generate excitement on campus, feel free to go for it.
Right. Yeah, so this is a project that gets a lot of media attention. And in a way, we have the ability to shine the spotlight on different aspects of what we're seeing in the market, right? Whether it's student debt or other kinds of debt. So if there's organizing happening on a specific campus, we can highlight that as we make these announcements. So we would love to collaborate, basically, find out what people are working on.
Yeah, and this started in November 2012. It was the first, well, no, it was a little bit after the first anniversary of Occupy Wall Street. But I think we raised most of the money. I think we got up to about $500,000 during this telethon that we ran, this People's Bailout telethon. So we kind of structured it as this late night thing where we would announce, it was an event, we had different performers, really cool musicians, gospel choirs and everything, and had that all live streamed, and we would announce certain targets that we got to, and that seemed to work pretty well.
Initially, we just aimed to raise a small amount of money, actually, because this project was considered to be symbolic and real, in the sense that we could help some people, knowing this is a drop in the bucket. We're not going to change systemic issues, but that we could raise awareness, basically produce what we were thinking of as a social hack, make an intervention. It would get media, would go into the mainstream. We could then talk about issues that we're being talked about. Helped a little bit along the way. But the intention was to raise, $50,000 and then maybe erase $1 million of debt and be done. We got very excited, and then suddenly we had $700,000 over the course of several days. And now we've been investigating secondary debt markets, including student debt, private probation debt, which is a thing that exists in the US, I'm not sure. Medical debt, as we know, and we'll probably get into the predatory lending. So, Katie.
Yeah, another one of our main initiatives was the Debt Resistance Operations Manual, and we want everyone here to leave with a copy today.
Or as many copies as you can
or as many,
possibly
yes, or take multiple copies. There's, if you didn't get one when you walk in, there's some over here. There's also 2 boxes of them over here. Yeah, don't make us carry these back to the so that this is the sort of second iteration or second edition of the Debt Resistance Operations Manual. The first one was more of a pamphlet or kind of a zine. In the summer and fall of 2012, after Strike Debt as a group was getting off the ground, a handful of us, a dozen or so, who were part of Strike Debt at that time, came up with the idea to write this kind of short manual which we give away for free. And we did that because we thought that an important debt is so deliberately obfuscating and confusing, and in order to effectively resist debt and different kinds of debt, it's really important to understand how the debt mechanisms work. And so that was one motivation behind writing this, and we also thought it was important to reframe the debt. Usually, debt is framed in a sort of moral way, that if you take on a debt, it's your moral obligation to pay it back. And we wanted to reject that framework and say that the explosion in individual household debt over the past few decades is a consequence of our collective needs. And so we wanted to frame debt in a different way. So it began as a manual. It was about 100 pages. We printed off some copies. We made a PDF of it and circulated it up online. And we got a much bigger response than we expected. The kind of lefty blogosphere talked about it generally positively. And
go down, Thomas, to the
and also the financial press hated it, which meant we were doing something right. And so to distribute it the way we were distributing it, people either had to read like 100 pages on their computer, or they had to be at one of our events where we could hand them a copy of the zine. So we thought, oh, let's try to release this through more conventional book publishing channels so we can reach a different kind of audience. So we partnered with Common Notions, which is our small radical press run out of New York, and to turn it into a full-fledged book. And we also expanded it a lot. We added different kinds of debt. The first edition really focused on things like student debt, medical debt, housing debt, credit debt, and those chapters have been expanded. New chapters have been added. And there's also it's not only an effort to sort of impart information, but also to sort of sketch out the vision of what the debt resistance movement will look like. So,
that's cool. I also want to mention that there's a lot of practice dealing with the or and also that you know we can make this so now you can read the entire text online, but it would be great in the future to figure out ways to break it up and maybe add illustration or make the website more findable or something. So it's been a long project that's hopefully making it more accessible.
Yeah, so the whole thing is available for free. We hope you take physical copies back with you, with the people that you're organizing with or people on your campus who
And then, everything that's in the physical copy is completely available for free online and accessible.
Oh, and that URL is strikedebt.org/DROM drawn, or just strikedebt.org and there's a big link to it.
So now we're going to sort of zero in and briefly condense our analysis of how student debt functions, and the really simple answer to fixing it, at least simple on the level of how budgets work. So the one that I promise that this isn't going to be too heavy on charts and graphs and numbers, but this really is the one key thing to understand why people. These statistics are specific to the United States. Why people are being forced into debt. We're sold this idea that if you're in debt, it's because you made poor choices. You spent too much money, you didn't save enough money, you didn't work hard enough. All of that is complete, total bullshit. The fact of the matter is that, as you can see here, the dark orange line, in terms of the actual value, the actual wealth that workers are producing, we're producing more wealth than we ever have been before. For all sorts of reasons, we're working harder. But technological changes, just changes in the way that labor happens in the economy as a whole. However, when adjusted for inflation, the amount of wealth that workers get to take home has flatlined since the 70s. So even though we're producing, the portion of that that we get is staying the same. Now, before that, between like World War II and the late 70s, early 80s, we still have that classic like Marxist surplus tightened off by the 1%. Pie was staying the same size, but the whole pie was getting bigger. That all shifted around the 1980s. Your piece of the pie shrunk even as the pie was getting rapidly bigger. And all of that wealth went to the 1%. So even though our means to meet our basic needs have flatlined, the price of our basic needs have skyrocketed. And so when you look at tuition specifically, you can see tuition in the United States has skyrocketed, whereas median income has actually gone down in the last decade. And this is only since the year 2000. It's actually much more dramatic if you were to start back in like the 1980s or so. So, if education is a human right and really a basic need in order to survive in our society today, the price of it is enormous. Our paycheck is shrinking. The end result is you have to make up that gap with debt, with financing. Which is simply a form of wage theft in the future, right? The wages that you haven't yet made are already being stolen in the present by the 1%. Slightly more dramatic, so everything above that horizontal line that's going up are basic needs, like tuition, that's the really high one, childcare, food, whereas the price of things like a flat screen TV have plummeted. So we're still being told this big lie, though, that if you're in debt, it must be because you're buying flat screen TVs. Absolute total bullshit. For students who are finishing with a 4-year degree, the wages have not, have been going down in the last decade, and there's definitely a gender gap, which is magnified in part because more women are graduating from college than men, and they're graduating with higher amounts of debt. So the wage gap is actually amplified when you factor in tuition debt. And just to make it painfully explicit, this is the number of hours you would have to work at minimum wage to pay your way through school. So
there was a time, my parents, basically white baby boomers, were able to pay their way through college. And they internalized this in their consciousness as nobody helped me out, right? I paid my own way. Again, total bullshit. They went to school because everybody else paid to put them to school. And so this is, yes. Why has tuition increased 1,125% since 1978? There are multiple factors involved, but there's really one main driving factor. And that's that over the course of the last 35 years, we have been ever so slightly, every single year, privatizing the way we finance higher education. This is not me. I don't know.
This is the secret intervention.
It comes in right at some big moment.
Yeah, it comes. Great. The speakers in the room just started
So
acting.
since 1978, which up until 1978, you could still get a higher education 4-year degree either for free or for a minimal nominal fee. Since 1978, tuition has increased 1,125% in the United States. So these green lines that are all going down are state appropriations of public funds for higher education. The blue lines going up are tuition. It's almost one for one. It's a complex network in the United States between the state governments, the universities as institutions in and of themselves, and the federal government. The states have been cutting back the amount of public funds that are going to pay for higher education. Away, the university increases tuition by $1. And then the federal government comes in and says, okay, well, we're not going to fund that gap. We'll replace that gap with loans. And this, I wish that the statistics went, these only started in the year 2000, it'd be much, much more dramatic. If you're interested in reading further, in the manual, there's more details on this. But there's also a footnote that links to this study, a fantastic study by Demos, that really details what they call the great cost shift, away from treating higher education as a social good that all of us should pay for and all of us benefit from. Even though I haven't met any of you before today, if you get an education, I benefit, all of us benefit. But we've been shifting the burden of paying for that onto each individual person, which is fine if your parents are the 1%. Right? But, there's this myth that higher education is the ticket to social mobility. It's pure fiction. In the United States, there's very, very little social mobility. Economic outcomes are largely determined by the economic situation that you were born into. But our universities are more like a social filter. If you're extremely wealthy, you go to school, your parents write a check, you graduate, you pass go, you collect $200, and you're winning Monopoly. If you are born into a lower income family, you're simply priced out of, you're not allowed. These are the states where a 4-year public university surpasses 15% of median income. So you have to make it on your own with a high school diploma. For everyone else in the middle, the price of that higher education is to mortgage your future. These universities are not places where social mobility happen. They reinforce class barriers. But they don't necessarily have to. This is one way to design a system. It's not a very democratic way to design it. But this very graphically shows debt in the United States. It would actually cost to make all public universities completely, totally free for all students. It's remarkably affordable. Bob Samuels at UCLA, he's involved in the California. He's done a fantastic research, just published this book in the last year. I highly recommend you read it. I mean, there's all kinds of places where you might agree or disagree with what he's saying. But he lays out really clearly just how messed up the current way that we're financing higher education through a system of tax breaks and subsidies that are completely inefficient. If we just removed all of those and directly paid for education, according to his book, we could do it without any new revenue at all. Now, in StrikeDebt, we used Samuel's research and we sort of made our own decisions. And we decided in order to make tuition completely free along our principles, it would need roughly $12.4 billion of new revenue each year in order to make it happen. The good news is it sounds like a lot of money, but that's a rounding error on the federal budget. I mean, this is nothing. To put it in perspective, the Pentagon wastes $70 billion a year, according to the Pentagon. We should just be raiding the Pentagon's budget. We could have free healthcare, we could have free childcare, we could have everything that we want if we just destroy. The F-35 to keep the USSR out of West Berlin, that we are still spending more than the GDP of Australia on. Even people in the Pentagon don't want it, yet we still spend it. We could have free education and not have the F-35 project. To put the war on drugs. And there's all kinds of places we could get this. The Robinhood tax is one way that you could do it. Not necessarily the only way, but a Robinhood tax would generate, what, $300 billion each year? $350 billion each year. There's $1.3 trillion of student debt. After just a few years, we could pay off all of that student debt while funding free education and having a lot left over for a lot else. So how do we actually get there? How are we doing on time? We're
good.
We're good. Okay, about an hour. So although the dollars and cents add up, there's a huge gap in power, right? The 99% simply don't have power. And I think this is why a lot of us from StrikeDebt want to come to Montreal, is we want to learn how to just seize that power, right? In addition to student unions, which can organize on campus and have the students gain power on. It's easier to organize as students than it is as, right? They're all geographically located. You all can meet face to face. What do you do when you graduate? Especially, what do you do when your peers don't actually understand the mechanism that they've been caught into until they graduate and they've got $30,000 in debt and they're working at Starbucks? What a debtors union might look like, or how debtors could join together and take collective action for collective refusal, simply non-cooperation with finance. And Mike, you said this really well yesterday. You want to try to take a stab again at how important it is to just understand these mechanisms?
Sure. As you may have noticed, a lot of the work at Strike Debt so far has been on kind of knowledge production and on understanding intricate mechanisms of debt and finance. And through that work, we have realized that understanding these mechanisms and learning how to intervene in them in a powerful way is a super important part of organizing the debt resistance movement. So this drudgery of figuring out all of these things is actually really, really important. And that something like a role. None of us are students currently. We all have student debt. But I recall from my student days that when we would organize around things, even around tuition increases, we didn't delve very much into those kind of intricate financial details. And I think, and I've learned that through this work with Strike Debt, that actually is really instrumental for everywhere we're strong. So if there's one thing we want to impart to you as students of organizing is to dive into these things, because this is where the power is exercised. This is how you're exploited, and learning how to intervene in these processes is super important.
And there have been some great groups, especially in California, that have started to do this, where they're making it really visible for students in California how not just their students, but their universities and as institutions are being buried in debt. That up until 1972, you could attend the University of California for free or for a small nominal fee. Today, the university system of California each year pays $1 billion on interest alone to Wall Street. These are the universities who are in debt because they're funding building and operating costs by taking out bonds. And they're paying $1 billion in interest on students. So they're literally taking your dollar Bob Meister has written really well on that process. When we look into how these student loans actually function, there's a big divide between whether or not it went through the FAFSA program or if it is a private loan. Right? I actually got the vice president of Sallie Mae on the phone because we wanted to buy some Sallie Mae debt. And he refused to sell it to us, but he confirmed that they take some of their private student loans and they just sell it to a debt buyer for 12 cents on the dollar. So why should you be forced to pay 100% of this loan when Sallie Mae is selling it for 12 cents?
Oh my gosh.
And when Sallie Mae originates their loans in the first place, it's not as if somebody at Sallie Mae worked really, really hard at Starbucks and started a bank. And when you borrow money from Sallie Mae, you're borrowing this hard-earned money that needs to be paid back. That has a small capital reserve that allows them to lend money that doesn't exist. The money doesn't exist until they lend it. When we pay our debts back, we have to actually work. An extremely lot. A very active member of Strike Debt. Bree published this book called Creditocracy and the Case for Debt Refusal. This complete imbalance of power between the creditor and the debtor is what he calls a creditocracy. It's a highly anti-democratic relationship. Now, up until the year 2009, if you were borrowing money through the FAFSA program, that money was also being originated by a bank. It was my debt. This, what you're seeing right here, is a student loan asset-backed security that my personal loans are a part of. My personal loans were originated at Citibank and Deutsche Bank. When I borrowed money through FAFSA as a young, 18-year-old,
explain that.
I'm sorry, FAFSA is the Federal Student Aid, wait, FAFSA. It's the Federal Student Aid
Financial
Lending Program. That's not the exact acronym, but it's the United States federal government's system that allows private lenders to lend money to students under a highly regulated system. Since 2010, the government has started lending itself. Yes?
So it's called Free Application for Federal Student Aid.
Thank you.
It's free.
And it has special rules that don't apply to any other loan. For example, if you default on your loans, the federal government can just start garnishing your wages. They don't have to take you to court. There are no statute of limitations. You cannot declare bankruptcy on it. You can leave the country. You can die. This is what, yeah.
But in some cases, death isn't enough, right? Because that debt is then.
If it's a FAFSA debt, it should be enough.
Okay.
If it's a private loan, sometimes even that isn't enough. And this is part of why we formed Strike Debt, is that there are no good solutions. We have to invent them. So my student bundle place bets on how profitable they think this bundle of loans are going to be over time. The interesting thing about it is that there's only about 50,000 loans in the. If we could organize those 50,000 people, we could fight back. The trouble is, out all over the globe. There's no if there is a private student loan, it is illegal to garnish your wages in the state of Texas and Pennsylvania. So if you have a private student loan, you could literally stop paying, take the hit to your credit score, and then call up your lender directly and say, look, I'm never going to pay, and you have no way of getting this money from me. You can try to sue me, but you're not going to be able to garnish my wages. I will settle with you for 3% of principal. And if that lender is smart, they'll take that offer. If they're stupid, they might wait. But eventually, it's the only way they're going to get it. So this might be a place where we could experiment on a small scale with the debtors union. But it would be nice to build up to the point where, isn't this great? The language is still indentured trustee, Deutsche Bank. So this is a different one of my student loan asset-backed securities. You can see they've got two different classes, which are given two different credit ratings. And this is the LIBOR rate of return that the investors are getting. If we could organize even 10% of the people in this student loan asset-backed security to refuse to pay, we could sink this investment. Once we can do that, we can start to gain power over them, right? And that's all they really care about. If they start losing money, they'll start meeting our demands.
When I wrote, for example, it would do that.
Okay, so Yes.
Maybe you want to say why we've gone this far, rather than maybe get on board with the reform campaign or do something wrong like get forward. Take a little bit extreme. Why would we?
Sure. So right now there are all kinds of solutions and non-solutions that are being floated that people are probably familiar with. Word proposal.
Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing what people think of it.
So I think it's a fine idea and to see how it plays out, but I think it does incentivize universities in the long term to invest more in majors and enterprise majors that will end up producing, or result students who are going to get more profitable jobs. And so unless, in my mind, I see that unless there's like safeguards against diminishing their investments in the arts and the liberal arts, because they don't necessarily traditionally make as much money or public service, there's going to be a shift in universities just over time towards money-making majors.
Yeah, I should have asked, is there anyone who isn't familiar with the Pay It Forward program? Okay. Does somebody feel like they understand it well enough to explain it? I can take a crack at it, but you want to?
Isn't it 3% of things? So basically the idea is that you don't pay anything while you're for either like a certain cap or like
a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And the proposal at this stage is just a proposal. We don't have the actual. It's in the process of being made. We don't have the actual way that it would work. But the idea is instead of taking out a loan, the state would just withhold from your paycheck directly, like they do with Social Security. The numbers that they're playing around with, 3% for 20 years, for the average student actually represents an instant tuition hike of $7,000. But the good part of it is that if you graduate and you end up working a very low-wage job, you're not going to be saddled with debt that never goes away. However, this initial proposal was first made by, blanking on his name, Chicago economist Freeman. Milton Friedman. This was his dream for how to privatize higher education. We just steal a percentage of people's pay. And it absolutely will warp incentives. If you want to work in a really high-paying industry, you're going to go to a private school. Whereas all of the public universities have as few social workers as possible and as many bankers as possible. But the main thing that just bugs me is that the people who are pushing this are calling it a debt-free solution, which is, it's not actually debt-free. I mean, this is just debt. I forget the analogy we've been using.
Well, we would just call it a wage debt solution.
Yeah. So Elizabeth Warren also has this bill out that just got defeated, where it does nothing to address tuition. It does nothing to address the $1.3 trillion of existing debt. What it would do is slow the rate at which it would grow through a very tiny mechanism of income distribution. I do think I recognize a couple of people who were in Madison, Wisconsin last year for the National Student Convergence. Was anyone there? There was a guy from the Democratic Party who spoke there, who talked about the internal polling that he was doing. And you could see he was really excited. I mean, he seems like a nice guy and everything, but he was just drooling when he said, when we ask people if they have student debt, if we just separate out those people in the poll, the people who have student debt, and we ask them, what's the most important issue to you? And they get any choice, the war, the economy, jobs. The number one issue to people with student debt is their student debt. And he said, if the Democratic Party can seize on this issue, a whole army of voters waiting for it. And it really is, I mean, I think this guy was a decent guy, but there really is a cynical aspect of it. The Democrats just have to be seen as slightly better than the Republicans. And, you know, the bill was a propaganda piece for a good punchline of supporting millionaires or students. If the Democrats really wanted to stop supporting millionaires, it'd be really easy to put a Robin Hood tax and make education free tomorrow. If they did that, I might consider voting for it personally. Not speaking for anyone else from Strike, but
The bill allows you to refinance your student debt.
That's true.
Yeah.
However, last summer, Congress tied the interest rate to the market, to the bond rates. So in about 3 years, the interest rate is going to be high enough that nobody's going to benefit from refinancing. You would never refinance at a higher rate. So it's perhaps useful as a propaganda piece for the Democratic Party, not so much for actual students. Right. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of these Silicon Valley startups that are trying to help students manage their debt. This is just one of them. I'm not trying to promote them. I'm just trying to show you this tool because it's very similar to what we're imagining building as a way of organizing debtors for something like refusal. So I went ahead and created an account. That's again from
the ghost.
I think it's from the ads.
Oh, that's an ad, okay.
Oh, we've been bombarded by advertising all these times.
Where is the ads?
No. You must
Ship to.
Alquiar.
It must be set to French.
This? Thank you. Oh boy, I'm going to need a lot of them. I don't even know what my password is, but it's got all kinds of fancy symbols.
I don't think he's going to
Okay. Did that work? Okay. So these are my student loans. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people think, oh, my servicer is Sally Mae. I'm in debt to Sally Mae. It's not actually true. Sally Mae is just your servicer. You may or may not have Sally Mae as a creditor as well. But this is usually as far as anybody sees. You have to log into the National Student Loan Database in order to really see who your current creditor actually is. But on these systems, you can add you create an account, and you tell them, I have a Sally Mae loan, and then you just have the information that you would enter into Sally Mae's website directly in order to access your loans. In this case, it does ask for a social security number. But once you do that, these Silicon Valley startups just scrape Sally Mae for all of the data, and then they aggregate it. And they're currently aggregating it for hundreds of thousands of people. So imagine if we had a system where we could take any debtor of any kind of debt, and you create an account, you log in, and we can scrape the data. And we can find out which of the student loan asset-backed securities your debt has been bundled in and traded on Wall Street. So now we've got the 50,000 people who are in my particular slab. They're all creating accounts all over the world. And as the data is being scraped and put together, we can form a sort of like a slab-specific union. And it'll only take 3% of us to refuse to pay, and we can sink that investment. Right? Imagine if we took every person with an underwater mortgage in the United States. There's something, it's in the DROM, in the Debt Resistance Manual. I don't remember off the top of my head, is it 40% of mortgages that are underwater? Something like that. It's a very large number. If we had everyone who was in an underwater mortgage continue to pay their mortgage into an escrow account rather than to their creditor, we could negotiate a principal write-down on all of those mortgages similar to what they did in Iceland. Iceland recovered from the financial crash because they did the exact opposite of what all the other countries did. So this, this idea is in its very early stages. Here are just screenshots. You can add a credit card. And this is a screenshot of this is just one of my student loans through FAFSA. This particular loan is currently at $8,000. But you can see that although my servicer is Sallie Mae, the actual creditor is this Deutsche Bank ELT Sallie Mae Trust, which this is the student loan asset-backed security. My creditors are a series of thousands of Wall Street investors. And then this is the guaranteeing agency. All right, I feel like I've been talking too long. Does anyone want to jump in?
No, I just think that, we should share time for the rest of the, but the point is that what we'd like to think about are new forms of collectivity and organizing in new ways to run capital, right? It's complicated, it's messy, but there are ways in which we can join together, even though we are geographically and otherwise alienated in different ways financially. And there are new forms of collective bargaining that we take. So we would like to try to think about a different scale.
Just have a question that you can address later, but what do you think would be the best one? Do you think it would be pushing for the Robinhood solution? Do you think it would be refusing to pay the debt? Like, if you had to pick one solution that's the most effective, would you speak to that?
I mean, for us, for myself personally, obviously we're working on this. It's a better way to go. I think just the first step in making this visible, that this is a possibility, and visualizing it is a very powerful thing to create a tool. When people start to understand that there's a way to come together, right, and organize, and say, delay payment, which is more of a traditional, like, slow down the production line. It's going to delay payment for this long. How much pressure are we going to apply? Or let's say refuse payment for 1 month, see what happens. Or let's just say that we're going to say we're going to do that. Let's see how that changes the landscape. We see that what's happening in the U.S. is that we're not getting very far with war and interest write-down. So why don't we push? Our position is there are other people who are going to do other projects, and this is dedicated.
So let's assume that the Robinhood tax was the best way to do it. How do we make it happen in a system where we have a political system that's completely unresponsive to actual people? To us, it seems like we're going to have to do this ourselves. It has to be direct action, civil disobedience, if we're ever going to get something like the Robinhood tax through. It's not going to be voting for the right politicians or, Elizabeth Warren is fantastic, but she's never going to pass the Robinhood tax.
Well, and Elizabeth Warren too, I think that it's considered, I think easily defeated. That's considered the to pressure.
We also want to change a little in the U.S. It's like challenge the language of the right. Yeah. So let's talk about debt as like this is power. Debt is money, right? You know. So why don't we understand that like the thing that we experience as a vulnerability and personal shame, our own individual circumstances, is a point and a tool to leverage.
I just wanted to clarify to make sure that I'm saying this the way the right way, right? My current understanding, if you are going through legislative sessions like we're all doing next week, it's great if you're professional and that's your job as an organizer or as a designer or that you're working in the strategic way to accomplish these things. If you're an average person with very little time, or you have children, or you have other obligations and whatnot, and your main practice is not working professionally for political change and for political movement, you don't have that time to engage. That what I'm deriving from this is that by being able to identify the lender rather than the servicer, what that does is that creates a way for us to recognize each other that we didn't have before, like wearing the red square. These little red squares lets us know that we're keyed into the same movement and the same cause. The second that we can visualize that lender, we can create a body. And what that body is it's not just that we have this lender in common, it's that we have a common force over that lender because we are their capital. And I think, Thomas, you said 3%, that if only 3% of us are identified or are able to identify with this lender and then connect with each other regardless of our localities, regardless of whatever other mechanisms we might otherwise need to create a group sense or a collective sense, that if we say refuse to pay or make demands therein, that that's a power that we have, and that if we are identifying to that power that we're having over this creditor through a movement of student debt and through the greater themes of inequality that the system has put on us, that's this force that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the time, and I don't want to encroach on Gabriela's time. So I think we should continue the discussion through this new forum.
Okay, so, and this is totally kind of the path that we've been working on. For those of you who are a little late, I am Gabriela from the Grace Period blog, and we're a collective of artists and activists that work around student debt. And so while you were been having this discussion, I've been trying to come up with a creative action with my collaborators that are in New York right now. So what we were thinking is that, well, since we can borrow money that is fake and pay for our education that way, then we must also be able to make our own fake money and repay for that fake money that we got. So what we would like to start working on as a call for action is to take some sort of waste from your workplace that you assign the value to your debt to, and then find your lender, your loan creditor, lender, whomever you actually owe the money to, not your provider, and then to have a one day where everyone shifts their form of repayment to them, and that perhaps we can borrow the red square and have it in that too, so that it's all the symbols are there. So we're gonna probably post the proposal on our blog and try to send it out to people. I would like to know what you guys think about that in relation to this conversation that we've been having. Anybody? Yes?
Would that also be applicable to people who are still in school? Like, at least in the U.S., they say that we pay start paying after we leave college. So is that something that we would also be able to do?
Right. Well, you already owe if
Right.
you have some debt. And I think we can get very creative about it. Like, maybe I don't owe, but maybe my friend owes. So maybe I'm just going to take something and give it, like, maybe I'll be like, I'll pay 50% of your debt, friend. And, you know, kind of make that item payable to, I don't know, John Doe from Wall Street. Ta-da! The soundtrack. So of course, if you're a student, you already have debt, you can take your composition notebook and assign it the value of the debt that you have thus far and already get rid of it. You know.
Maybe we could just boil it into a larger conversation amongst ourselves. So we're not doing all the talking. And just ask you current students or recent graduates about how you think of your own student debt. Has it affected, for example, what major you've chosen? Has it affected what school you're going to? Are you terrified of when you actually start paying it back? Do you believe you'll actually have to pay it back? I mean, like I said, none of us are students currently. And for me, for example, I went to the University of California. Tuition was much lower than it is now. It's something like 400% higher than it was when I graduated. So it's circumstances are much different now.
About student debt, where I went to school, it was $3,000 a year. So when I go in to teach my classrooms, I always feel like whatever I'm saying is not even close to it's close to the cost. I feel ashamed to walk in the classroom, ashamed still for the students. I only get 8% of the tuition dollars for each student, for instance. And who knows where the rest is going. So it's very shameful to be on the other side and to be a participant with them.
So I'm also an independent student. I'm paying for myself in the long right now with financial aid that I pay back. I owe $26,000 after 1 year, and it did affect the major that I chose. I was going for music and arts and photography, and I'm also really good at math and science. So I totally changed to engineering to try to get. I mean, one, I love the path I've chosen now. It's like environmental and whatnot. So I'm glad I found something, but I think that would help me be able to pay it off, and that did definitely affect my major. I'm definitely scared of it. Like, I don't know really how to handle the whole thing. Hopefully this will definitely help. I'm doing it totally by myself. It's my first time last year doing financial aid. So I'm doing all the loans and the interest and everything myself. I'm definitely scared of it.
Remind us, you go to a college in the States.
I go to Michigan State University in East Lansing and.
Public school.
Huh?
Public school university.
Yep.
Still.
And then what you were saying about how there's sometimes picking certain majors to be more important, supposedly, than others. We heard in a board of trustees meeting.
Maybe we could just close it.
We don't have any ads on our website.
Yeah.
No one wants to know.
I did ads.
Let's just close it off. Or do we have any ads in this?
Do you want to shut
Sorry.
We heard at a board of trustees meeting, or just slight word of it from teachers union that we're in cooperation with, that they're at Michigan State, they're going to make it, I don't know if they're calling it, called circle majors, or the center majors of the college. They're going to raise tuition prices per hour for specific majors at Michigan State. This is not well known at the school either. And the arts and everything and literature, those would stay maybe lower, but then not as much funding would go to those. And that's saying that maybe some majors are more important than others, and I think everything's equally important because we all need everything. So that's scary as well.
This is
where I see a student union being so important, because if those decisions were being made by the students and the faculty themselves, rather than an administrative class that sort of does what it wants. So I mean, what I'm really eager to see is students coming together, or adjuncts at, now Columbia's, that's a private
That's
school.
a non-profit private.
A nonprofit private, so their budget isn't going to be public. They might give you the top line. But that might be a place to start. We want to see the budget. We want to see the budget because we want to write the budget. And at Michigan State, can we take over Michigan State? Can we write the budget? Can we take over Michigan?
There was some information I got from James Andrew, you guys know Andrew as well. Him and another person from Michigan State, Duncan, they found this guy that did it at his school. I don't remember all the details. At their university, he got into the budget, which is publicly shown in some cases, and he picked out the budget of your school to be able to write an article to what's it called, brand shame your school, just to get that information out there. And in his, it was showing in 2005 what the tuition was, and then what the school was making off it, and then in 2013 increased on what the school was making. So there's just a lot of cool stuff going on, but yeah, we can definitely take over.
Well, do we have access to public schools budgets?
Yes, it's kind of hard to find. You have to go through a lot of stuff to find it, but some people know exactly what to click on to find it.
And the good news is Michigan State has an entire department where they're training students to become accountants. I mean, that's how you're caught up in the middle of this.
Yeah.
All right, are you guys familiar with Cooper Union? Free Cooper Union?
Yeah.
Okay, Cooper Union is a private school in Manhattan that gave every student a full tuition scholarship. It's a very small school, about 1,000 people. It's art, architecture, and engineering. And they decided to abandon the full tuition scholarship this past year and start tuition. This has been in the works for years. They had a series of, they're funded mainly by, they own part of the Chrysler building. Peter Cooper in the 19th century took that and used that as an endowment to fund this. The school was based on this full tuition scholarship, and due to just a series of, they have some bad investments in Wall Street. They built this insane new building that they didn't get any funding for, and there's a group trying to prevent this called Free Cooper Union. They occupy the top floor of the things, and have been unsuccessful. Their latest tactic is to bring them all to school for the way that they last year, the administration gave them the option, said, okay, you take 6 months and you come up with an alternate budget that allows the school to remain free. And they did this, and they released it. And I thought it was really impressive. You can probably find it online. There's a PDF I read through. They gave all of these. Here are all the different ways we could make up, and it would be, things would be lean, but, here's all these different things we can do. They had different categories like the facilities. Here we could rent it out. We could use fewer rooms. Faculty. Here's what we could do. We could have students take on some of the work there. All a bunch of really great ideas, and of course, the administration had it in mind from the beginning that they were never going to consider this, but it was really great exercise. And it allowed a private school who's, they're notoriously opaque with their budget, and it allowed all of that to happen.
It's all very good practice for graduation, because if you're lucky and fortunate enough to actually get a job where you can pay some of this and stay afloat, you'll be debt financing every other basic necessity, like healthcare, wages, everything else. I hate to be the bearer of that news. You already know this. But the point is that another reason to like sales that I think that is essential is that it's connecting these dots, like in the spaces where people are, we're subsidizing a small population, taking more and more of our efforts, and basically turn it into a commodity while we suffer and struggle through our lives with little sustainability. So what can we do? It's not anything, it's accelerating.
I think just the conversations are really exciting. My partner wasn't educated at all growing up and took out a bunch of loans and a bunch of credit cards. So they're at 60,000 and I'm at 20,000 right now. I'm not done yet. And so we just find it really frustrating that when you have that debt, it dictates the rest of your life. And it's a system that perpetrates the rest of the systems, because then it means that you're going to go and get a job working for the man because you have to pay back your debt. So it's really restricting all of society. And so I think if young people are talking about new possibilities of breaking the debt chain and the ball and chain, then it opens us up to a whole other realm of what we want to do with our lives and what we want our future world to look like. So thank you guys.
I just want to say off of that, because that's basically why my collective started. Like, most of us have master's degrees in art, which is, of course, is like, yeah. Like, for example, like my two collaborators that are live with me right now, they're like at 80,000, I'm at 100,000. And it's like, once you have that, what kind of life can you be expected to manage as an artist? So,
it restricts you from having kids. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, yeah, that's not even like in the mind right now. But so we imagine. So of course we all went straight into like getting all the serving, you know, like being servers. We're all servers and nannies and juggle like all these different jobs. And we're like, well, if we're doing this just to pay the debt, but the reason why we got into it was to make art, then I mean, we can't drop the art. So we started making the art about the debt, and that's basically what we want to encourage everybody, is to just keep doing your creative work, or whatever work it is that you got yourself in debt for. Because that's, I mean, that's the core of it, that in the end, if you got yourself into it for that reason, you have the right to do it. And I mean, there's also a question like, well, if there's not, why should I pay for it even if I get like a job as an artist? That's not going to give me enough money to pay for it. So then how is it possible that it costs that much, right?
I just want to point out that there's a possibility that there's another session that's going to start. So feel free. I mean, we're going to be hanging around for a couple of days to talk about this endlessly. But if anybody feels like they're tired of sitting,
So we can, you've all been very attentive for a long time. So if you're, so we can hang out and continue to talk informally. But if folks have other things to do or need to go, feel free. And everyone should leave at least one copy of the drawing, the book, and multiple copies if you want to get that to your friends or your parents. So if you don't have, bring a box of it.
And I will be emailing everyone about the action, so you should all join in the action and pay for your debt and your friend's debt. And that should be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And I'm going to need your help for some like logistical and theoretical stuff that everyone needs. Okay, Sydney, I'm going to log out right now from this. Are you there? This is over, even though it's in the live stream. It's not. I love you guys. I'll convene with you later. I have to run to Encuentro now, so. Ciao.